A horrifying story spanning several local counties and gaining national attention. Dozens of sets of human remains are stolen from this cemetery in Delaware County. And that's just part of the many disturbing details as police search the suspect's home today.
Okay, so this is completely different to the usual documentary style stuff I cover on this channel, but sometimes you come across a case so batshit crazy that it literally cannot be ignored. In early January 2026, police conducting surveillance at Mount Moriah Cemetery on the outskirts of Philadelphia made a discovery that would unravel one of the most disturbing grave desecration cases in modern history. What began as a response to repeated reports of vandalized graves quickly escalated into something far darker. In the backseat of a parked vehicle they found, officers observed human skulls and bones in plain view. Moments later, a man emerged from the cemetery carrying a burlap sack and a crowbar. Inside the bag were the mummified remains of children, skulls, and human bones. Evidence that would soon lead investigators to more than 100 stolen set of remains, hidden across a home and in a storage unit miles away. The man arrested that night was disgusting creep Jonathan Gerlach, a 34-year-old from Ephrata, Pennsylvania, and he is now facing nearly 500 criminal charges ranging from theft and burglary to abuse of a corpse and desecration of historic burial grounds. Authorities allege that for months, Gerlach targeted sealed vaults and mausoleums within Mount Moriah, one of the region's largest and most neglected historic cemeteries, systematically removing the dead from places meant to ensure eternal rest. Some of the remains were centuries old, others belonged to infants and young children. How long it had been happening and how it went unnoticed for so long has raised some seriously troubling questions. This case has drawn inevitable comparisons to Ed Gein, the infamous mid-20th century grave robber whose crimes shocked the nation and reshaped public understanding of post-mortem desecration. So what has happened? Let's talk about it. This is the story of Jonathan Gerlach, the modern-day Ed Gein. To understand how the theft of more than 100 human remains could occur undetected for months, it is necessary to understand the condition of the place where it happened. Mount Moriah Cemetery is not just a burial ground, it is a vast, historic landscape that reflects decades of neglect and abandonment. Established in the mid-19th century, Mount Moriah spans more than 160 acres and is believed to contain approximately 150,000 graves. Generations of Philadelphians were buried there, Civil War veterans, children lost to epidemics, immigrants, religious communities, and families whose relatives may no longer live nearby or even knew their relatives were rested there. Over time, the cemetery fell into financial hardship, ownership disputes, lapses in maintenance, and the absence of consistent oversight left large portions of the ground overgrown, unsecured, and deteriorating. Fast forward to the 21st century, Mount Moriah has effectively become a cemetery without guardians. Mausoleums cracked and seals crumbled, headstones toppled over or vanished beneath grass. Whilst non-profit groups later attempted to restore and preserve sections of the grounds, much of the site remained vulnerable. The fencing was incomplete and surveillance was minimal. In some areas, there was little to distinguish protected historical burial spaces from abandoned land. This vulnerability is not unique to Mount Moriah. Across the United States, older cemeteries, especially those containing unmarked graves, mass burials, or marginalized communities have often been left behind as cities expand and populations shift. When burial sites lose active caretakers, the dead officially lose legal and physical protection. According to investigators, this environment created the conditions that allowed repeated break-ins to go unnoticed. Police allege that graves and underground vaults at Mount Moriah were forcibly entered, stonework damaged, and remains removed over an extended period of time. In some cases, valuables such as jewellery were taken along with the remains. The crimes were not hidden well, but they occurred in a place where few were watching.
This is an example of one of those underground vaults that were broken into. You can see bricks everywhere, scratch marks indicating that someone struggled to get this 9,000-pound top off the vault and get themselves down inside.
This was an outcome of long-term abandonment. In that silence, the cemetery became not just a resting place for the dead, but an unguarded archive, one that could be violently and repeatedly exploited by a sick man before anyone even noticed. The first signs that something was wrong at the cemetery did not come from routine patrols or surveillance systems, but from those trying to save what remained. Members of a non-profit organisation was working to restore portions of the cemetery, and they began to notice repeated disturbances, with multiple burial vaults that appeared to have been broken into. Between November 2025 and early January 2026, police were called to the cemetery multiple times. The damage was not isolated. Investigators would later determine that these vaults were being deliberately targeted. These were not opportunist acts. They required tools, time, and familiarity with the layout of the grounds. Whoever was responsible understood that Mount Moriah's size and neglect provided cover. So this brings us to the evening of January the 6th, and as stated earlier in the video, the Yeadon Police Department and the Delaware County Criminal Investigation Division began surveillance of the cemetery. At approximately 8 PM, they observed a vehicle parked on the grounds. They thought this was strange, so they went and had a look. And from outside the car, officers could see human bones and skulls in the back seat. Shortly afterwards, the suspect exited the cemetery carrying a burlap bag, a crowbar, and other tools. They seized the bag, and police discovered mummified human remains, including those of children. The suspect was taken into custody at the scene. A search warrant was quickly issued for his residence and a storage unit in Pennsylvania. What investigators found there escalated the case dramatically. According to prosecutors, detectives entering the home encountered rooms containing skeletal remains in various states, skulls placed on shelves, bones stacked or assembled, mummified hands and feet, and decomposing torsos. In total, authorities believe more than 100 full or partial set of human remains were recovered from the home. Some were estimated to be hundreds of years old. Others were described as significantly more recent. In at least one case, a medical pacemaker was still attached to a body. Delaware County District Attorney Tanner Roos described the scene as truly horrific, stating that detectives had walked into a horror movie come to life. But the reality, he emphasised, was not fiction. Each set of remains represented a person who had been buried with the expectation of dignity, an expectation that had been violated. He also went on to say, "This is an unbelievable scene that no one involved, from myself to detectives, to the medical examiners that are trying to piece together what they are looking at, quite literally. None of them have ever seen anything like this before. Some of them were hanging as it were. Some were just skulls on the shelf. Understand, some of these are 200 years old." I have personally seen a supposed leaked video of the police body cam from inside his house. It is absolutely insane. There isn't much information about the video I've seen online, so I'm not sure if it is real, but it seriously looks real. I can't put this video on YouTube because they will take it down. So this begs the question, who actually is Jonathan Gerlach? As this case is so new, there really isn't much information available about him. However, we do know he was born on September the 24th, 1991, making him 34 at the time of his arrest. He drove a silver Toyota RAV4, and his neighbours thought he was an ordinary guy. However, his neighbours had noticed something strange leading up to his arrest. Property records show that Gerlach purchased a 3-bedroom row home in October 2023, where he lived quietly for nearly 2 years. During that time, the neighbours began noticing something unsettling. Swarms of flies clustered against his garage and basement windows, sometimes numbering in the dozens. In forensic science, blowflies are often the first indicators of human decomposition, capable of detecting it from more than a mile away. In hindsight, the neighbours were sensing decay. They simply did not know it was human remains.
I didn't know anything, honest, just from seeing him outside. You know, very quiet. There was never any police activity over there.
From doing some research of my own, I found that he was part of multiple Facebook groups where he would sell these human remains. This included oddities, curiosity, antiques and skulls for sale, and antiques and oddities swap. I will now read out some of his ads. This one reads, "I recently came into possession more kittens that I'll be mummifying and posing. You choose the pose." This begs the question, where did he get these kittens from? Another reads, "Black bear skull. need funds for other pieces, so this is priced to sell immediately. There was also this one, which was marked as sold. Now, as you can see on these screenshots, they are dated back as far as 2023, which made me wonder, did he start off with animals and realise that the human side would make more money? I also found that he worked at Target and Hot Topic, finding some comments from his old colleagues. Again, this is the internet, so believe what you want, but one of these comments says, "I wouldn't really know what to say, besides he was a quiet guy, but when I worked with him at Target he was funny and outgoing. Even have some Facebook memories that pop up here and there of him asking if I'm working the same shift as him." On another comment thread, I found this. It was a woman claiming her husband was his neighbour, but they weren't allowed to play together after an incident when they were younger. The incident was never discussed. Oh yeah, I also found this picture of him in school. Outside of this, it was clear that Jonathan was into metal and motorbikes and had quite a lot of friends. Among them was Trevor Poole, a Lancaster County musician who described Gerlach not as a recluse or an obvious threat, but as a close friend from the local music scene. The two met around 2010, performing shows together with their bands My Heart of Fire and Jonathan's band Road to Milestone, where he served as a lyricist and vocalist. Poole recalled Gerlach as empathetic, introspective, and largely private, someone he shared drinks and long conversations with outside of performances. The allegations, now numbering in the hundreds of charges, left him struggling to reconcile the person he knew with the crimes described in court documents. Whilst Poole acknowledged that interest in the macabre themes are not uncommon in heavy metal culture, he said Gerlach never openly expressed fascination with human remains at the time. That contrast grew sharper as search warrant records revealed Gerlach followed hundreds of social media accounts focused on skeletons, skulls, taxidermy, and oddities. Trevor Poole said, "Good people can do bad things. He was always a good dude. My overall take, generally, is I never ever would have expected him to do something like this." And this seems to be the theme with people who knew him. They said he was a good, quiet guy, which makes this case even more complicated. The arrest of Jonathan Gerlach marked only the beginning of what will likely be a long and complex process of legal accountability and public reckoning. While around 500 charges have been filed, authorities are still working to identify the remains, notify families, and piece together the full scope of his crimes. Each discovery of bones or skulls presents both a logistical and emotional challenge. The remains must be catalogued and analysed with scientific precision, and the families potentially affected must be treated with care. Beyond the immediate criminal case, the events at Mount Moriah highlight a broader need for systemic change in cemetery management. Abandoned cemeteries should not be treated as eyesores, but a place where people's loved ones are resting. Without consistent oversight, they become vulnerable to exploitation. He's currently being held at George Hill Correctional Facility on $1 million cash bail. The charges include abuse of corpse, theft by unlawful taking, receiving stolen property, and desecration of venerated objects. For now, more information is coming out about this case every day, so I will no doubt be making a follow-up video if this is something you'd like to see, so make sure to let me know. As always, this is not an AI channel, I do everything myself, so if you appreciate my work, subscribe, and if you want to go that extra step to support the channel, maybe consider becoming a member. Let me know what you thought about this case in the comments below, and as always, thank you for watching.